Willkommen, bienvenue, welcome. Hello, everybody. My name is Music Man Sam, or Sam the Music Man, whichever you prefer. And it's been a while. It has been about a year since our last episode aired. That's just life got in the way. Life was happening. Got super, super sick at one point, and just haven't gotten around to having the time to record episodes. But I'm back. Um, Another fun little interesting fact about this episode is that I'm going to be the only one here today. Everybody's extremely busy in this area. They either graduated or everybody's just really busy. So I thought I would just do this episode flying solo today. So, as I said before, my name is Sam. My theater history is I am getting my BFA in musical theater. I am studying it right now on my last semester, and I've been doing musical theater stuff for roughly about 5 to 8 years now, and it's been my passion and obsession for the longest time. This episode, we're going to be talking about the musical Now Hear This. Now, last episode I told you guys we were going to be looking at title of show. Now, title of show and Now Hear This are written by the same amazing, beautiful people. It is written by, if I can pull up here it is. It is written by the amazing team of Jeff Bowen, Hunter Bell, Susan Blackwell, and Heidi Blickenstaff. The same four people who did title of show also did Now Hear This. And I did this show a while ago. I did it about a year and a half ago. And I gotta say, it is one of my favorite shows for a lot of reasons. It has a very great message behind it. The characters are very lovable. The music is phenomenal, and all of the songs flow with very beautiful, beautiful lyrics, composition. Everything about it's just really, really solid, I feel like. My overall impression of the show is that there are a couple things that hinder this show from being really, really, really perfect, but I feel like there's some ways to get around that. Those I'll discuss. This will be a much shorter episode, so if it's not an hour or 45 minutes long, just know it's just me talking. I have a very frail voice, so I cannot be talking by myself for an hour straight. And I've had to re-record this episode about 2 or 3 times now, just because I want to make sure I get it just right for you guys. So, let's start off with the script. Now, the writing in the script is, it's very interesting. It's very real, honestly. When you listen to the soundtrack, which I highly recommend listening to the soundtrack, it's the original cast recording. You can find it either on YouTube or on Spotify. If you want to get a good kind of idea of what the script is, if you can't get a hold of the script yourself, listen to the songs Dazzle Camouflage, That Makes Me Hot, and Golden Palace. Those songs really push forward a lot of what the dialogue is like and a lot of what the monologues in the show are like as well. Because those songs are dialogue and monologue, which is really fun, honestly. And I'll talk about that more when I get into the music, but the script itself is, I feel like, extremely well written. However, there are a lot of flashbacks in this show, a lot of jumping from past to present. And with this show, that's one of its hindrances, which makes this show a little confusing. One of the biggest complaints when I did this show of our audience members were that they really couldn't follow along with where they were, where we as the actors were, whether we were in the museum or in a flashback. So I feel like there are ways of getting around this via the technical aspect of the show, which I'll talk about later on. But that's kind of what the script is like. The words and the messages in all of the scenes are very true and heartfelt, I feel like, especially the scene with all of the actors talking about their grandmas. It's a very heartfelt scene where two of the characters are telling the stories of their relationships with their grandparents. And the other two actors are playing their grandparents. I was given the privilege to play a grandma, and I thought that was a lot of fun and entertaining, and it was really heartfelt. It was one of those scenes that we as a cast really cried a lot over, and had a lot of really really good memories with some of the meanings that the script has to offer. The characters of this show are interesting. If you look online in the synopsis, you'll notice that these characters aren't necessarily named. And if you look, maybe it says Jeff or Hunter or Susan or something like that. Well, those are the people that wrote the shows. They also played themselves. This is more like an autobiographical or biographical, whatever those two words. It's kind of that show. It's a story of the lives of the writers. But if you're not the writer, like myself, your characters are man one, man two, woman one, or woman two. And I feel like the writers of the show did that so that the actors can really connect with these characters. So they're not really playing a different person, but they're playing maybe a different form of themselves. Like I connected very, very strongly with my character to the point where I just didn't feel like I was acting really anymore. But I was just playing a different role of myself, which is really interesting. The characters in this show are really true. They're honest because they're people who wrote the show. Um, the dramas in this show or the conflicts in this show are very real and very true. And if the actors that play these characters can portray those relationships and portray those characters really, really well, I feel like this show has no problem with being really believable. And speaking of the relationships, I had to move my computer there for a second. The relationships of the four actors need to be extremely true and extremely believable. And if you can't make them, if you have, let's say you cast four people and they don't really know each other, you really have to make sure that these people, these actors, can really either become really close and really good friends, or they need to play it off like the bestest of friends. Because without that, the show will fall flat. Now, the plot of the show, like I kind of said with the script, it's very, I don't want to say clunky, but it's hard to follow if you're not reading the script. And if you're reading the script, you can follow along because you have the stage directions as to going back in time, or if you're really you, or if you're a random person like Archer, or it kind of just depends. I'll talk more about how the plot can be conveyed really perfectly with the tech. Um, but I think the plot might be its weakest point because it's more or less trying to push a philosophy, the Now Hear This philosophy, rather than having a beginning, middle, and end, which is really, really unique. It's more or less all these characters having flashbacks, and then at the very end of the show, them being with the audience, talking directly to the audience, saying, "We're right here. Insert this theater here at this time in this city," which really connects with the audience. Which I think is really interesting. If you can get a hold of the script somehow, I highly recommend reading it because it's a really phenomenal read. And if you can see the show, definitely go see the show because it's worthwhile seeing. The stage directions, pretty simple. It'll tell you when you are, where you are, and who you are. If technically this show, let's just move on to the tech aspect of this show. What is necessary for this show to work technically? Well, for this show to work, period, you need to have a way to make sure that those flashbacks and the transitions from the past to the present are extremely seamless. And I feel like you can get that done really, really well with lighting. For example, in one of the scenes, one of the characters is in an ocean exhibit, or the whale exhibit of the museum, and the sound cue is talking out throughout, and then it immediately jumps into dazzle camouflage. with that, I feel like there could be a lighting cue. For example, the contrasting blues in the ocean scene could be immediately switched or juxtaposed with a shift to red lighting when it jumps to the flashback of the quote dazzle camouflage end quote. And I feel like having that color shift in lighting could really drive forth the we're in the past and we're in the present kind of scenario with this show. And I feel like with that, the script will be a lot easier to follow, especially for the audience. For the actors, this show flows seamlessly, but they know what the show is like. So, for the audience, I feel like a visual cue, like the lighting, will definitely help. Another thing that surprises people with this show is the amount of sound and projection cues there are in this show. There are so many projection cues in this show that you might need a single person to hit the button for projection cues. Or if you've got a system that allows you to hit the button for both lighting and sound cues and projection cues, you've got it golden. But there's a lot. So having maybe more than one person working on the lighting and the projection cues might be smart. But there's a couple dozen projection cues, if I can remember correctly. So that's something that I think surprises people when they do this show. What's the what's the minimum or maximum amount of this show could use as a set? Now that's a very interesting question. With this show, you definitely need those projections and you definitely need those sound cues because it's written into the show. But you don't have to use a set, I feel like. I feel like you really don't need a set. For this show, it might behoove a director or a technical director's uh, audience to have a set just so there's something else to look at besides an empty stage and maybe some lights and projections. But I don't think it's necessary. When I did it, we had a pretty decent sized set, but there was nothing, no platforms moved on, no flats that got moved on. It was just a solid set. So if we wanted to go into a different exhibit into the museum or change scenes, we would just move to a different part of the stage, which I thought did pretty well, but I don't think having a set is necessary. So I'd say a set isn't necessary, but having those projections and having those lightings and having those sound cues absolutely is necessary. So a minimum, don't have to have a set. At minimum, you must have those lightings and the sounds and the projections. What are some different things that I've seen, want to see, or could see working? Like I said all throughout while I was talking about this set, the seamless transitions, it just needs to have those past to present transitions flawless. And I think they could be definitely done well with lighting. And I'd like to see that attempted at one point. But other than that, I haven't seen this show before. I've been in it, but I haven't had the chance to see this show, so I can't really talk much about that. Let's talk about music now. I adore the music in this show. Now, a little bit of musical theater history, we're getting to a point in musical theater music composition where a lot of the musical numbers have dialogue throughout, either dialogue or monologue throughout. And it's really interesting because this show is a lot of monologue and a lot of dialogue, as I've stated before in Dazzle Camouflage, That Makes Me Hot, and Golden Palace are two extremely remarkable examples of how well music and monologue and dialogue can work well together. And that's kind of what musical theater has been leading up to and transitioning into, is that kind of musical theater music style, is the music and dialogue or music and monologue. I think Golden Palace is probably the best example of how beautiful a composition can work with a monologue. I personally did Dazzle Camouflage, so I'm a little opinionated, but I will say that Golden Palace is a very, very gorgeous piece of composition, as well as a piece of script and a piece of theater. The music is very much so based on rock and roll. It has a lot of rock inspirations throughout, but it is not a rock musical like Spring Awakening or Rent. It is inspired by that, but it is still very much inspired by the classic musical theater musical styles, which you can see in Members Only and Kick Me, and then a lot of the ballads like Then Comes You and That'll Never Be Me are extremely musical theater-esque and are extremely gorgeous and have beautiful messages and beautiful stories throughout each one of those songs. Now, I am very opinionated when it comes to the music because I worked with it for so long and I really fell in love with it. But to each their own. This is very specific genre of music. So like I said, go give it a listen. You can go listen to it on YouTube or Spotify. It's just the original cast recording, and it's very, very, very pretty. I really, really like it. The lyrics are very much so written like the script. Very conversational, very storytelling driven lyrics, and it's a lot of the songs are mostly monologue and dialogue. And when there is singing, it's very beautiful and very awesome and cool. But it takes more inspiration from the musical theater dialogue than it does to typical lyrics to a musical, especially to like a rock musical or rock and roll, like I was saying before. It flows pretty well with the show. I'd say it flows pretty decently, just like the script. It will flow much more seamlessly with the tech aspect of the show, or with even what the blocking is with the show, because you can do really really well um, with the flow of the musical if the blocking is right, or if the choreography is right. If you so choose to have choreography in this show, we'll get to that later. Um, and yeah, the I think the flow of the show isn't hindered at all by any of the songs. I think it flows seamlessly because it's just so dialogue driven and monologue driven. Um, and honestly, there isn't a lot I don't like about the music of the show. There is not a lot I don't like about this show. I'd say the only things I don't like about the music, or really anything about this show, would be the the amount of work I think the tech people have to do to make sure that this show flows seamlessly. And I think a lot of that just has to come with what the directors and the actors come up with to make sure that the show flows seamlessly, like the lights or the blocking or something like that. And to each their own. Each theater is different. Um, the dance. You don't have to have dancing in this show. You can have some cute little choreography or some cute little step touches or maybe some cutesy stuff, very, very easy musical theater stuff, but I'd say you definitely don't have to have music, or not music, you have to have music in the show, but you don't have to have dancing in this show, per se. But for big numbers, like what are the odds, I feel like there should be some form of good blocking or choreography to make the numbers really pop out. And that really brings us to the end of my talking about this show. We, me, I guess, I'm all alone here. Um, my rating for this show, I adore this show, but I know that it has its own flaws, and I don't think it ever made it to Broadway, if I remember correctly from the little wiki page that I have open here that I can't seem to be finding the history of. Um, so it obviously didn't really. It was pretty confusing to some people, mostly because of the scene transitions, I feel like, from the past to the present. So, what I will say is, my rating will be an 8.5 out of 10 to a 9 out of 10. Just because I really, really love the show and I connect really, really well with the show. And I feel like anybody who sees this show or listens to the music even will truly connect with it. And if it ever comes to a theater around you, I highly recommend auditioning or even going to see it because there's something that I know everyone will be able to connect well with. Thank you ever so much for listening to this podcast. It's been too long, guys. It's been too long. I will be taking requests as to what musical you would like me to be talking about next. I'll hopefully have guests for our next episode of Let's Talk Musicals. But just let me know in the comments what you thought of the show if you've seen it or if you've been in it. What character were you? Other things like that. What was your favorite musical number? Let me know down in the comments. Slap that like button. And just let me know what musical you would like to see on our next episode. And remember, everybody, live long and play on.